Orihime Inoue is a very controversial character within the shonen anime sphere. Some people hate her and call her useless, while others say that she's an amazing character. I land within the sides calling her an amazing character. Now, while she isn't the best written within the series, she is definitely well written. Today, we are going to be discussing the short 4-chapter Orihime mini-arc from chapters 3 to 6. We are introduced to Orihime's character within chapter 2 as a very airheaded and bright girl with an overly active imagination that also has a crush on Ichigo Kurosaki, our main character. But her story starts within chapter 3. At the beginning of the chapter, we see Orihime get into an accident. She gets hit by a car. Now, how does she relay this information to Ichigo and Rukia when she meets them? Of course, with a smile. Pay attention to that smile. It is very important to understanding her character. After their interaction, Rukia notices something. A mark on Orihime's leg, an indication that a hollow has marked her as their target. Fast forward to later that night, Ichigo gets attacked by said hollow, only to later find out that that hollow was Orihime's late brother. Then yada yada yada, stuff happens. Eventually, we get to the point where Orihime and her brother are talking one-on-one. We find out that Orihime used to pray to her brother every single day, telling him all about her worries and every sad experience. However, as time moved on, Orihime stopped doing this. Instead, she started talking about her happy experiences, mostly about Ichigo Kurosaki. Still tethered to this moral coil by the chains of regret and the desire to watch his sister grow up, Sora felt slighted. Felt that Orihime was choosing to ignore him. He feared that one day his little sister would forget about him. With the realization that his sole purpose now was to only observe finally sinking in, he was sent spiraling down into a pit of despair, left in pure isolation, unable to speak, unable to talk to anyone. His loneliness consumed him, eventually leading to his corruption, his transformation into a hollow. There, as Sora let out his boiling resentment, Orihime also came to a realization. Her efforts were in vain. She thought by hiding all her sadness and suffering through the veil of happy moments and a bright smile, she could give her brother peace of mind in the afterlife, that she is living a good life. Unfortunately for her, this had the opposite effect. Sora felt even more alienated, unable to grasp onto who his little sister had become, his only semblance of belongingness. And at some point along the way, he lost himself within all the negative emotions that had his soul in a chokehold. And then some more stuff happens, yada yada yada. We get to the point where Sora, after hearing what Orihime had to say, chooses to pass on into the Soul Society. Saying their farewells to one another, Orihime once again gives out a smile. A reassuring, genuine smile. This says a lot about her character. While it is obviously a facade to hide all her sadness and suffering, she also means it. It's genuine. This also brings such an interesting parallel to Ichigo's character and his own dynamic with smiles and emotions. But I'll explain that in a later video. Now let's move on to our next portion of the discussion. Let's talk about Kubo's amazing visual storytelling once again. As I stated before in my last video, Kubo has gotten so much better when it comes down to his manga composition, from the placement of his dialogue bubbles to the reduction of unnecessary sound effects, and of course his paneling that directs our eyes from one panel to the next. These minor tweaks in his composition have made the manga so much more readable with a noticeable degree of clarity. It's impressive how much he's improved in such a short couple of weeks. Starting at the beginning of this mini arc, we get to see how much he's improved with how he is able to direct our eyes from panel to panel. It's so seamless. Furthermore, we get introduced to one of my favorite visual storytelling techniques, telling a story through the eyes of one's characters, which is especially prevalent through chapters 5 and 6. When Sora was attacking Ichigo Kurosaki and Ichigo broke Sora's hollow mask, revealing his true face, we, the readers, couldn't see his face. His eyes. This stayed true up until Orihime and Sora were talking one-on-one, where he finally reveals his identity to her. At the beginning of the conversation, his eyes looked soft and warm. But as soon as Orihime mentioned Ichigo and Tatsuki being hurt, his eyes turned cold and cruel. As they dived deeper into their conversation, his eyes weren't looking at Orihime anymore. Instead, he was looking down, focusing on something else. His loneliness. Even the speech bubbles diverted our eyes away from theirs. His anger shook the page, forcing us to focus on his wrath-filled jaws. This indicated to me that he was only focused on his own perspective. He didn't care about anyone else's. Sora was not willing to even consider Orihime's point of view. Suffice it to say, Sora broke eye contact. And once that eye contact was broken, even Orihime stops looking at Sora's eyes. She stops looking at Sora. Stopped thinking of him as her brother, because the brother that she knew wouldn't hurt the people that she cared about, wouldn't be this violent, wouldn't be screaming, "I just wanted to kill." I mean, just look at this page. Orihime was focusing on Ichigo. Then once she starts looking back at Sora and said this, Sora looked at her eyes. He became enraged, wanting to kill her, because he knew she meant what she was saying. But of course, Ichigo being Ichigo was like, yo, you shouldn't be saying this to your sister. Once again, taking Orihime's focus. Sora was screaming in pain, screaming at Ichigo, standing in his way, always separating him from his sister. Now, let's bring our attention back to his eye. It starts becoming black until it's fully consumed. That eye within this manga panel is pure darkness. He starts attacking Ichigo instead of Orihime, who he thought was the reason for his continued suffering. He shifted his blame, his attention on Ichigo, making him that reason. At this point, we see Sora and Ichigo just eyeing each other, while Orihime is just in the background, looking at this mess, looking at it all. A tirade of shouts and screams. Sora continues to rage, and then her eyes shifted focus once again, this time on her brother. And then he finally attacks. He attacks Orihime with the intent to kill. And from this point on, we don't see her eyes. Not until she says her piece. But look at Sora's eyes. The eye that was just a blank white void becomes an actual eye. It returns to its original shape, showing us Sora. As for the black eye, the eye that was consumed by darkness, it starts to regain its original color. Only then are we finally shown Orihime's eyes. Now they're making eye contact. Orihime says that she loves him and passes out. There we see the real Sora. See him worrying about Orihime, trying to understand what she meant, her perspective. We see him taking in the opinions of both Rukia and Ichigo, trying to piece together what Orihime was going through, instead of just using his own perspective, his narrow-minded perspective. Soon after he finds his answers, Sora comes to terms with what he had done and chooses to break his mask, revealing to us his full face. There, Rukia saves Orihime, consequently bringing her back to consciousness. The two siblings once again meet eye to eye, but this time, Sora has his eyes back, not corrupted by his regrets, the loneliness he felt, nor the pain that he was suffering. He looked into his sister's eyes not as a monster or a hollow, but just as an older brother saying farewell to his little sister. I loved this mini arc. Okay, now let's move on to our last portion of the video. And there are gonna be a lot of major spoilers for Bleach, so skip this portion if you don't want to be spoiled. I'll have timestamps right here so you'll know where to go. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's actually talk about why I love this panel. This panel says a lot about Orihime's character without even having to say any words. It foreshadows so much of who she is and how she fights. Yes, how she fights. Within this chapter, we see her recognize that Sora is hurting, that Sora has been harmed because of her. And rather than trying to attack, trying to harm him, she embraces and accepts him. She tries to repair their bond, their relationship, tries to fix that misunderstanding, rather than to further push away Sora and tear that bond that was already torn to shreds. We see her empathize with him, and this empathy shows throughout the series. This part of her can be seen in her healing abilities. When she's healing the Shinigami at the end of Soul Society, the ones that imprison and enforce execution of Rukia Kuchiki. We see this with the Hollows, the Arankars, the people who were tormenting her, torturing her, the ones that put her through so much physical and mental abuse. We see her try to relate to Ukiura, one of the strongest, most heartless Espada, her captor, to the point where she, in the den of Hollows, in the den of monsters, is the one being called a monster. Furthermore, within this panel, we see her sacrifice herself by taking on the brunt of the attack. She didn't want Sora and Ichigo to continue fighting. Instead, Orihime took on Sora's attack filled with regrets and resentment. This aspect of her soul manifested through her shield. in which, mind you, has stopped the attacks of so many strong characters: Noitora, Yami, Ukiura, and even the strongest, most OP character within the series, Yuha. I'm sorry, that was a bit off topic, but I just wanted to point out that she is an extremely OP character that can match the hacks of some of these other characters. Well, at least to some small extent. Anyways, Orihime is willing to throw herself in harm's way to protect others, much like Ichigo. But unlike her male counterpart, she is much more willing to heal and mend than to harm her opponents. They are two sides of the same coin. With that being said, thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more Bleach content, and follow my other socials down below, especially my Pixiv where I post my art weekly. That's all I have to say. Peace out.